What's going on, guys? Welcome back to my channel, where today we have the Stardom Situm Quarterback Edition for week 1 of the fantasy football season. Now, because this is going out on Saturday, this does not include either of the Thursday or Friday games. So sorry about that. They will be out sooner in the future, but without further ado, let's get right into it. Now, up first, we have the Panthers going up against the Saints. This is a divisional matchup, but I'm going to go ahead and sit both of these guys. Now, me, myself, I'm a big Derek Carr believer. I always have been. I always will be because of my connection to Fresno State. I just can't hate him. But I'm going to go ahead and sit him here versus the Panthers. Now, when you look at the Panthers last year only allowed 13.9 points per game to quarterbacks. That was the third lowest in the NFL. They have a really good passing defense, despite their rushing defense being pretty mediocre. Along with this, Derek Carr really struggled last year. He was 26th in accuracy rating, 24th in fantasy points per dropback, and 22nd in fantasy points per game. He put up 7.7 and 11.8 points last year versus the Panthers, which shows that he was struggling, and I didn't see the Saints get that much better this year, so I'm going to go ahead and pass on him. Now, as for Bryce Young, he had a big rookie, blunder, I would say. He was 30th in true passer rating, 29th in fantasy points per game with 10.4, which is abysmal. 35th in fantasy points per dropback, 28th in passing touchdowns. He only threw for 11 last year. And versus the Saints last year, he had 15 and 7 points with a total of 290 passing yards. So that wasn't even 150 per game, and a total of 1 touchdown with 74 rushing yards. This is going to be a tough divisional matchup. It's something where these defenses are going to really hold strong. The Saints have always had a decent defense somehow, and the Panthers are just getting started with theirs. So I think this is going to be a real tough, matchup where as much as they want to throw, they're not going to be able to. Pressure's going to be on them. It's going to be very difficult. So I would go ahead and I would avoid this game at all costs. I would just sit them and, not worry about it too much. Now up next, we have the Vikings taking on the Giants. And I'm going to go ahead and once again sit both of these guys. Sam Darnold, nothing against him. He has a ton of weapons. Jordan Addison, Aaron Jones just went there. Justin Jefferson, obviously. But, I haven't really seen greatness from Sam Darnold. I'm a 49ers fan. When he was in the game, I didn't see, anything that was too special. And we have an offense where I feel like any quarterback could thrive in, and it didn't seem like he could. So even though he has, all of the talent around him, and the Giants' defense is pretty trash, I don't really see the need to start him here. As for Daniel Jones, coming off of a major injury, it's going to be very difficult for him. He excels in certain fantasy aspects because he's mobile, he's capable of running, but, he's coming back from a major surgery, and it could limit him. Along with that, Daniel Jones isn't exactly the guy that's putting up game-breaking numbers. He did get a major upgrade in receiver in Malik Nabers, who is set to be the number 1 receiver for New York. But, he's a rookie. We don't really know what's going to happen there. And I think Daniel Jones, he's regressed a little bit. This is his prove-it year, but I think he has a lot of pressure on his shoulders. And I don't see him rising up to the challenge. I don't see him performing crazy against the Vikings. I think, maybe 1 touchdown, 2 touchdowns, but I also feel like he's probably going to turn the ball over 2 or 3 times. And, that for fantasy, that's just not viable. So I would go ahead and, again, avoid this matchup at all costs. If you have to play one of them, that I feel sorry for you. Now, this is going to be one where I actually have a starter and a sitter in this game. The Patriots at the Bengals. I think that, to nobody's surprise, I'm going to start Joe Burrow. The Bengals addressed their O-line in the draft and in free agency. That's a big issue that they've faced over the last couple of years. And everybody has mentioned it from the very start when Joe Burrow was a rookie and he did get hurt. You got to address the O-line. You got to protect your quarterback. You got to protect your guy that's got you to a Super Bowl, and they really did that. They added Trent Brown in free agency and Amarius Mims and Matt Lee in the draft just, to show that they were really taken it seriously to address this. They did lose Jonah Williams, which, big loss for them, I feel. And they lost Tyler Boyd and Joe Mixon, but I don't see this being a problem for Joe Burrow. He's too talented. He has too many weapons around him. As of right now, I don't know if Jamar Chase is playing, and I know T. Higgins isn't playing, but I'm not really scared of that. I think Joe Burrow still has the talent to get things done. And with, the lack of quarterbacks that are starting caliber this week, I think, Joe Burrow is one of those guys where you can't really afford to sit him. Along with that, Pro Football Focus has the Bengals ranked 13th with these additions in his offensive line. So, they really are taking that step forward. They just have to, protect their quarterback and let Joe Burrow get it done. The Patriots defense did only allow under 16 points per game to quarterbacks in 2023, but these numbers are pretty heavily skewed because they played against the Jets twice, one of those being Zach Wilson, the other one being, I think, Trevor Siemian, and those were not, good showings. Along with this, they did play against backup quarterbacks in the Colts and Gardner Minshew and in the Raiders games, so, their numbers are a little skewed. I think that they're a bit worse than people expect. So I would go ahead and just continue to play Joe Burrow versus them. As for Jacoby Brissett, when you look at the quarterbacks from the Patriots last year, in Bill Belichick's last year, Mac Jones in his 10 starts averaged 11.7 points per game, and Bailey Zappi averaged 8.14 in his 6 starts last year. So with Belichick out, this is a whole new revamped offense. This is a whole new revamped pretty much everything. So that being said, putting Jacoby Brissett in there and, giving him probably the worst wide receiver room in the NFL and potentially the worst offense in the NFL and an arguably bottom 3 defense, it doesn't make for, a good performance. I think the Bengals are probably handily going to win this one. And I don't see any reason to start Jacoby Brissett. He doesn't appeal to me whatsoever. I wouldn't be surprised if, at some point during the season he gets benched for Drake May or Joe Milton. And, if he was a starting caliber quarterback, I think he would have been so for much longer. So I'm going to go ahead and be pretty comfortable sitting Jacoby Brissett here. Next up, we have the Steelers going to Atlanta to take on the Falcons. Now, shout out my boys who are going to be at this game in person. Unfortunately, I couldn't go, but I'm sure it's going to be a great game. We have Kirk Cousins to go first. I'm obviously going to start Captain Kirko. Offensively, the Falcons are considered to have a top 3 line in the entire league. Kirk Cousins is a consistent fantasy producer. He's averaged about 18 points per game since 2015, and he's going to an offense that has a ton of potential weapons. Bijan, Drake London, Kyle Pitts. Darnell Mooney is no shy person either. He has a lot of weapons around him, just like he had in Minnesota, and this is a much better defense, in my opinion, than the Vikings or the last couple of years. I think that we should allow him to get more opportunities and have a much easier time gaining points. So I'm gonna go ahead and definitely gonna start Kirk Cousins here. And Arthur Smith isn't running this offense anymore, so Atlanta's on the way up. They're potentially going to win this division this year handedly, no questions asked, and I'm here for it. Now, as for Russell Wilson, I'm going to unfortunately go ahead and sit him. Now, I think Russell Wilson's a very good fantasy producer. I think he's amazing as a fantasy producer, and he's shown that over the course of his career. Along with this, the Falcons did give up the 6th most fantasy points per game last year to quarterbacks, but they did add a much-needed pass rusher in Matthew Judon, acquiring him from the Patriots, and additional secondary help in Justin Simmons, acquiring him from the Broncos. Now, Wilson is also currently dealing with a calf injury. There's no set in stone that he's playing or if Justin Fields is going to take the reins. But even if he plays, I've heard some stories that Justin Fields has been said by Tomlin to have some sort of role this week, maybe some sort of like wildcat type where he's in the backfield or in shotgun, and he, runs the ball, but he can also throw it. I think that they might decide to use Justin Fields a little bit more because of this. And, with Russell Wilson going to this new offense, and dealing with this injury, I mostly just want to see kind of what's going on in Pittsburgh before I decide to start him. I think he does have the potential to be a top, 15, top 12 quarterback if he can figure it out, because the Steelers are usually, average to above average team. I just need to see what's going on first before I warrant actually starting him. Now up next, we have the divisional matchup between the Texans and the Colts, and it's to nobody's surprise, I'm going to go ahead and start both of these guys. First, for CJ Stroud, 18 points per game versus the Colts last season. New weapons in his offense in Mixon and Diggs. They have a very solid offensive line despite losing 3 O-linemen in Font, Dexter, and Jones. And he's looking to pick up where he left off on an amazing rookie season. I think that everybody expects CJ Stroud to be amazing this year. I think that he picks up definitely where he left off. He definitely has a better offense than what he had last year. And, there are some people out there that are looking at him to potentially make a run toward MVP. But for fantasy, there's no doubt in my mind he's worth warranting a start. As for Anthony Richardson, same type of deal. He did deal with an injury last year, 21 points per game, or 21 points in his first game last year versus Houston. They didn't really lose any major pieces offensively. They drafted Adonai Mitchell out of Texas and added 2 linemen. He has some major upside due to his rushing ability. He showed that in the games that he did play last season. And he's got a top 5 offensive line in this league. That should be able to protect him, so it should allow him to stay in the pocket if he chooses to, but also maneuver around and protect him when he's trying to use his legs. Over the 3 games that he played in, he did average over 22 points per game, and, he has a lot of potential. His ceiling is very, very high. I think that Anthony Richardson has the talent to be a fantasy viable quarterback and continue to produce for your team. So I'm going to go ahead and continue to start him because, there's no real reason not to at this point. And up next, we have Arizona going to take on Buffalo. I'm going to keep it short and sweet on Josh Allen. He's Josh Allen. He's been the number 1 quarterback. There's nothing else that needs to be said. I shouldn't have to tell you to start Josh Allen. You should already know at this point to start Josh Allen. So I'm going to keep it as simple as that. He's a fantasy god. There's no other way to put it. He gets it done. That enough said. Now, as for Kyler, it's a little bit different. Kyler kind of rose up the ranks this year during the offseason because he had some additions added to his team, and he was producing last year. When he did come back, he was fantasy viable. He was producing. He hasn't averaged under 18 points per game since his rookie season. He was just recovering from an ACL injury, but he put up really solid stats when he did come back. They added 2 O-linemen in free agency in Evan Brown and Jonah Williams, and they got some additional, depth pieces in the draft. They added a brand new shiny toy in Marvin Harrison Jr., who is said to be the greatest wide receiver prospect for the last, 20 years or so. And they had no major losses in free agency. The Bills did allow the 5th fewest points per game to quarterbacks in 2023, but again, Kyler kind of gets it done. He's a scrambler. If he doesn't see anything, in his first couple of reads, he's more than willing to go and do something with his legs, and for fantasy, that is amazing. He's projected to be a top 10 fantasy quarterback. We can't really afford to sit him. He went as your probable QB7, definitely top 10 in quarterbacks. This is one of those times where you just can't really afford to sit him, especially in these, first couple of weeks when we're starting to get going and starting to get things going with Marvin Harrison Jr. So I would go ahead and start him despite all of this, possibly saying, maybe sit him versus the Bills. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to keep him going. All right, Titans at Bears next, and this is a very interesting matchup because I am by no means a Caleb Williams believer. I think that a lot of people are overestimating his talent personally. I'm willing to recognize it, but not to the extent that everybody else is. Um, he has a very less than thrilling matchup against the Titans, however, and for that reason, I'm going to start him because he has gone to a very potent offense. You know, he took over Justin Fields' spot, getting DJ Moore. They added DeAndre Swift, Roma Dunze along with him in that draft, and Keenan Allen, which might be some of the best offensive weapons in the entire NFL. He just needs to show what he can do. Um, they added Coleman Shelton as well, and some depth at O-line and Ryan Bates. So I think this has the potential to really, really be a good start for him. Um, I saw a stat the other day that said that first round picks are like 1-20-1 in their first games this year. I think he becomes number 2. I think he puts up a really solid performance against a very mediocre Titans team. And, you know, I don't see any reason not to start him. I think that this is potentially risky, especially because I don't like rookie quarterbacks. But I'm okay with going ahead and starting him here. I think he performs well. I think he goes out, probably throws a couple of touchdowns, gets it done on his legs as well. I'm looking at probably 17, 18 points minimum. As for Will Levis, you know, 13 points per game over the last 8 games to start last season for him. He had a ton of additions in the offseason. They added 3 offensive linemen and a plethora of weapons, including Tyler Boyd, Tony Pollard, and Calvin Ridley. But, you know, Bears defense bolstered up last season. The further in they got, the better they got. And I don't think that they're going to slow down anytime soon. I think that the Bears handedly, take care of Will Levis. I think he made a lot of mistakes last year, and I need to see him improve on them before I even warrant thinking about starting him. So, you know, this is pretty easy for me. It's one of the easiest sits of the week for me. He's probably going to be one of the worst quarterbacks this year, probably low-end QB 20s. So I don't really see a reason to start him. You should have better options. So go ahead, keep him off of your starting. Up next, we have the battle in Florida between the Jaguars and the Dolphins. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start both of these guys. Now, Trevor Lawrence, he has quite a number of weapons around him. They still have Christian Kirk. They still have Evan Ingram, who was the number 1 pass catcher for them last year and the number 1 tight end pass catcher in the NFL last year. He has a lot of weapons, adding Brian Thomas Jr. I think that the Jaguars are going to be a pretty good football team this year. I think it does revolve around how successful Trevor Lawrence is going to be, but Trevor Lawrence to me looks like one of those old-time like Derek Carr, where he is going to put up like a solid 19-20 point performance, even if they lose by big, just because they might get a garbage time touchdown. And for that reason, I'm going to continue to start him. Along with that, the Dolphins defense was pretty horrid last year versus quarterbacks. They allowed a lot of points to quarterbacks last year. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start him. Along with this, Tua, he has a ton of weapons. Tyreek Hill, you can never underestimate Tyreek Hill. He can turn 5 yards into 95 real quick. Waddle can do the absolute same thing. I see him having a ton of other options that might open up his passing game because he has Achane, he has Mostert, and they did add Jalen Wright into that backfield. So that being said, even if nothing is going right, I see him having a ton of screen opportunities that could result in him getting a whole bunch of points. So I'm going to go ahead and start him against a Jaguars defense who was pretty mediocre last year versus quarterbacks, and gonna not think twice about it. These are 2 pretty simple starts, so go ahead, put them in your line. All right, up next we have the Broncos taking on the Seahawks. So we have Geno Smith and Bo Nix. I want to start this part off by saying that I believe that both of these guys could be very fantasy viable this year. I just want to see more from them. Geno had a very rough year last year. He was one of the most inaccurate quarterbacks, in my opinion. I watched a lot of those games. My dad is a Seahawks fan. So I watched a lot of those games, and he was missing his receivers. He was not having a great time, and his receivers definitely weren't having a great time. I do think that he can be one of those guys that consistently puts up 20, consistently is a QB1 each and every week, but I just need to see more. The Broncos, they were a bad defense last year for most of the season up until the end. But I need to see more from him. He needs to do better. He needs to get on it with his receivers. He needs to hit DK more accurately, Lockett, get Jackson Smith-Njigba more locked in. I just want to see more from this offense before I put him into a starting lineup. Bo Nix, I'm a huge believer in Bo Nix. I love Bo Nix. I think that he has the makings of being the next great quarterback in Denver. He looked amazing during the preseason, and I know what you're going to say, it's preseason, whatever, but he looked like a veteran in there. He looked like he had a grasp of the game. He looked like he was taking advantage of what the defenses gave him, and it showed. He was great. But again, he is a rookie. I need to see a little more from him. I need to see how he adjusts to the NFL at the pro level and at a regular season game before I put him into any of my starting lineups. But I wouldn't be surprised if he is in my starting lineup next week. And up next, another divisional matchup. The Raiders going to LA to take on the Chargers. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start Justin Herbert. And I know what everybody's thinking. New offense, his weapons suck. There's no reason for me to start him. But I disagree. Justin Herbert, statistically speaking, in his entire NFL career, has put up numbers against the Raiders. He is averaging almost 300 yards passing per game and over 2 touchdowns, and he's only thrown 2 interceptions versus the Raiders defense in his entire NFL career. Statistically speaking, granted, he doesn't have Keenan Allen. They did lose some weapons, but they did add Ladd McConkey, who is set to take over that number 1 spot for the Chargers offense. And I think with Eckler leaving and them adding in Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, I think that could potentially be a better fit for the Chargers. They added Jim Harbaugh, who is their new head coach, who's going to be running the ball, but I believe that should open up a lot of passing lanes for the Chargers. I think they were heavily missing that last year because Eckler looked horrible. So I think that the Chargers are really set up here to have a bounce back season. Do I think that they're going to be a playoff team? No, absolutely not. But Justin Herbert has proven that he is a fantasy quarterback. He puts up numbers. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start him regardless because I do believe that he is that good. As for Gardner Minshew, I love Gardner Minshew. I think his story is great. I think that he is a decent quarterback. I think he's a lot better than people give him credit for. However, going into this new offense, once again for him, he did have his moments last year where he looked a little bit sloppy, to say the least. And I just need to see, what he does with that Raiders offense. I know the Raiders really, really want to run the ball. Antonio Pierce has openly said he wants to give his running back 20 carries per game. And that kind of limits Gardner Minshew a little bit. He does have Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers, which I think make him sort of fantasy relevant. I just want to see what he does in his first game as a Raider before I, put anything on him or start him. So for me, this is a sit. I think it's pretty simple. And up next, we have the Dallas Cowboys taking on the Browns, and this might come as a shock to some people. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sit Dak Prescott. Now, the reason being is when I saw Dak face tough defenses last year, I did not see him rise to the occasion whatsoever. I saw him actually lose fantasy relevance. I think that the Browns are, one of those defenses where it's very difficult to play against them, and especially coming off fresh, they're all healthy again, I think that the Browns are going to smother the Cowboys, who have drastically dropped in terms of their offensive line over the recent, couple of years. I think that they're going to take advantage of that, and they're going to really make Dallas suffer. If they do get anything going, I think this is going to be a very low scoring game that's built around the defenses, and that's kind of why I have both of these guys here, because I don't see either of them, performing very well. They're probably going to have 15 points max because of that. So I'm going to go ahead and start Dak for sure. Deshaun hasn't been the same since he was in Houston, let's be honest. He was, performing kind of decent last year when he was playing, but he's been dealing with consistent injuries since he came over from Houston, and I need a lot more from him if I'm going to ever put him into a starting lineup. He needs to show me the Houston Deshaun Watson and not the Cleveland Deshaun Watson. And I don't mean the Houston one that was going around that was, being inappropriate with women in the massage parlors. I mean the guy that was putting up 25 points a game in fantasy, with DeAndre Hopkins. I think he can do the same if he just, holds it down, goes back, gets clicking with Amari Cooper and David Njoku, and even Jerry Jeudy now that he's there. I just need to see it, and if I don't see it, then he's going to be on my sit every week. And next we have the Commanders going to Tampa Bay to play the Bucks. Might be a little shocking. I'm actually going to go ahead and definitely play Baker Mayfield. He actually shocked everybody, including myself, last year with his performances in fantasy. He was shockingly like number 7 on my sleeper for quarterbacks. Mike Evans is still doing his thing. Chris Godwin's moving back to the slot. I think that this offense could potentially be really good, and the Commanders were one of the worst defenses last year in the entire NFL, not just against quarterbacks, but overall to everybody. So Baker Mayfield, I see him taking advantage of that. I see him, clicking for a couple touchdowns. And, when things don't get running, the running back game for the Bucks is not great. Rachaad White was averaging like 3.6 yards per carry last year, but he was very viable in, the passing downs, the screens, and, that gives Baker points. So I'm going to go ahead and easily start Baker here. I think he has a good spot here. Same with Jayden Daniels. I know he's a rookie, but the thing that's really making me push him into that start category is his ability to run. I think, he and Terry McLaurin, along with Luke McCaffrey and those other guys, Ben Sinnott, Zach Ertz, I think that they could really potentially be a sleeper team this year. Maybe not a, playoff team, but maybe, like a 7-10, 8-9 type team. If he can really get things going, I think running quarterbacks make, even if their team is really bad, they make themselves fantasy viable. And he is one of those guys. He can definitely change the dynamics of a game using his legs. And the Bucks were not great against quarterbacks last year. They allowed about 18 points per game last year to quarterbacks. And I see that continuing. They still have the best safety in the game in Antoine Winfield Jr., but, you don't need to watch the safety to run the ball. I think that Jayden Daniels gets it done, at least fantasy-wise, with his legs. I'm probably seeing like 50, 60 yards from him on the ground. That might be a little too much. I might be over-exaggerating. But I think that he has the potential to do that. And, for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and start him. He's probably going to end up running in a touchdown at some point instead of giving it to Eckler or Brian Robinson. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to put him in my lineup. All right, second to last game here, we have the Rams going to Detroit to take on the Lions, a rematch from the playoffs last year in which the Lions won. We're going to go ahead and we're going to start both of these guys. Both of these guys, great quarterbacks. Matthew Stafford, first, looking for a revenge. He has all of the weapons to be successful. Kyren Williams, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, Tyler Higbee. He has all of the weapons. He puts up numbers consistently. He's just been that guy. He's always been that guy. And, the Lions secondary last year was horrid. They were the worst secondary in the NFL. They allowed the most points to, quarterbacks, most passing yards. Like, they were bad. And I didn't see them get that much better. So Matthew Stafford, definitely going to go ahead and definitely going to start him. Now, as for Jared Goff, I think the Rams are a very sleepy, good defense. I think that they could throw Jared Goff, give him a rough time. But when he did play last year, when he was playing again against the Rams, he performed. He has one of the best offenses, if not the best offense in the entire league, with Amon-Ra St. Brown, along with Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, and Sam Laporta. He has the weapons to be successful, and he showed that last year. He was a top 10 quarterback in fantasy, and, people are still giving him disrespect. He went this year as like the QB 14. And, with all of these weapons going around, I don't think that he's going to regress that much. He should still be like top 12, top 10 minimum. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start both of these guys. They deserve their spots. I think that I think both offenses are going to cook. I think the defenses are probably not going to cook, if I can be honest, especially during week 1. So I think this is going to be a shootout where both guys are putting up like 2-3 touchdowns each. I think that is worth it. I think go ahead and start them both. And last but not least, we have the Jets going to San Francisco to take on the Niners. And obviously, I'm a Niners fan. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say both of these guys, Brock Purdy going up against the Jets. The Jets allowed the least points in the NFL last year to quarterbacks. They have a top, I would say a top 3 defensive line and a top 3 pass defense. I just think that their defense is that good. I think that, Ayuk held out for quite a while, so he's not going to get as many snaps. Trent Williams held out for a little bit. He's probably going to get a lot of snaps, but we don't have the greatest offensive line in the NFL. I think that he's going to have a lot of pressure on him, and we're going to have to rely on the run game a little bit to get going. We saw what happened last year when he faced very, very tough defenses when he played against Baltimore. I'm not saying that same thing is going to happen. Please, Brock Purdy, win me a Super Bowl. But that he's facing a very tough defense. And I'm going to need to see him take a step forward in order to start him against these tough defenses because of that. He struggled a little bit. I want to see where he goes this first game before I, see about starting him. So I'm going to make sure to sit him at the moment. Now, as for Aaron Rodgers, this is less about the 49ers secondary, which, by the way, is absolutely trash. Our secondary is horrid. I keep saying it every single year. We need to grab a new corner and some offensive linemen, and we just haven't. But Aaron Rodgers is 40, and he's coming off of an ACL injury. This is more so about seeing where he's at in his recovery from the ACL injury than Aaron Rodgers himself. I believe that Aaron Rodgers should be better than what he was drafted this year for sure. This is a guy that is 3-time MVP. He's won a Super Bowl. He consistently puts up 20 points, 25 points a week because he's just that good. But he is 40 and he's coming back from a major surgery. I need to see how the offense clicks. I need to see how his recovery went before putting him into a starting role. I do think that there is a chance that he just cooks our secondary, but I also think there's a chance that he, he's old and he's done. I think there's a solid chance for either or. So I'm not going to take a risk on it. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sit both of these guys, and that's just going to be that. So there you have it, guys. Week 1 quarterback, start him, sit him. Next week, I'm looking to also do the running back and wide receiver positions, so look forward to that. But if you guys like this video and you guys want to see more like it, make sure you comment, smash that like button, subscribe if you're new here, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.